Hey guys, my name is Mahalakshmi and today we are going to learn about software testing. So this whole course, it covers what is software testing, what are the types of software testing, the software testing models, and it goes extensively into mobile application testing and a small introduction on what is SDLC, and your bug management tools like Jira, sprint planning, API testing, and also it covers mobile automation using APM and robot framework. At the end of the course, I'll also give some tips on resume preparation and sample questions that get asked in interviews normally. And of course, I'll provide the reading material. Now, so let's begin with what is software testing. So, software testing is the process of assessing the functionality of the software product. What does that mean? It means that you would be provided a requirement and you would have the build of the software and you would compare the two. If the final software product is working as expected or is working according to your requirements. So that is what is called software testing in simpler terms. All right. Now, why is software testing important? There are a lot of institutes that provide you automation testing, and for why shouldn't you go for only automation testing at the beginning? So I'll tell you why software testing is important. There are especially manual testing and software testing, right? So there are a lot of things in manual testing that gets covered by doing manual testing of the application, which does not get covered in automation. All right. And for any for any automation tester to write a script to set up an automation framework, the basic requirements are he does need the manual test cases. So there has to be someone who has to write the manual test cases, cover at least the backbone test cases, at least the minimal of the test cases that covers the whole application or the whole build or the whole website or the whole feature that you're going to automate, right? So that is why software testing is, that too manual testing, is important. So we will go exclusively into mobile application testing because these days you know that there are a lot of institutes that provide Selenium testing, but you can call Selenium as outdated. So any of your fast growing companies, any of your startups, and most of the companies do not use Selenium anymore. They use robot framework, which is easy to understand, which is easy to write because it's written in Python and it is way more easier than Java. All right. So what are the types of software model? There are a lot of types of software model. This is one of the important questions that get asked mostly during your interviews. There are different types of models that has been outdated, which is not in use anymore, but it is good to have knowledge on what was being used, right? So there is waterfall model, there is agile model, there is spiral model, there is V model, there is iterative model, there is hybrid model, and a lot of these, right? So the one model that is being used is a combination of agile and scrum, right? So this is the model that is being used in most of the companies these days. So we will go further into all these types of models, the advantages and disadvantages. For example, if there was particular model at the beginning and we have moved away from it, that means it has certain disadvantages, right? So I will be going into what does waterfall model or model A, model B, model C, what does these mean and what are the advantages and disadvantages of it. All right. Next, we would be covering the types of software testing like unit testing, functional testing, system testing, acceptance testing, regression testing, usability testing, security testing, performance testing, right? So mainly software testing is divided into two categories of testing: black box testing and white box testing. Now, black box testing is the method in which you do not have to have the knowledge of the code. You will just test the touch and feel parts of the application, be it any application, be it a mobile application, be it a web application. So your black box testing is a type of testing where even if you don't know the code, you will test the touch and feel features or modules of the application. White box testing is a form of testing where you know the code and you test the code. For that, you have to have the knowledge of the code in which the software or the application is being written, right? So what are the types of mobile application testing? So what is the main point is, what is the difference between your website application testing and mobile application testing? Mobile application testing covers lot more test cases compared to your web application testing. For example, you can do interrupt testing in mobile application testing, and you can turn your mobile data, tone it down from 4G to 3G or 2G and see if your mobile application would still work. And you can turn on the screen revolver and see if the application is working fine. The main focus of this is the application should not break no matter what screen you're viewing in. And you can check your application in different resolutions of the screen, different size of the screen, and everywhere every components, every button, every word should be similar. It should get adjusted to your screen size, right? So this is one main thing that you have to test in mobile application compared to your web application testing. Next would be introduction to sprint planning. So like I mentioned, most of the companies today use agile scrum methods. Now what is sprint planning? So I'll tell you what is agile method first. It is a software development cycle that the companies follow, which does not take 2 months, 3 months. It would be divided into mostly they follow from 1 week to 4 weeks. That is a kind of sprint or the release cycle or the STLC cycle that they follow, right? So now in this 1 to 4 week sprint, it can also be a 2 week sprint, it can also be a 3 week sprint. It depends on the company. If one company starts following a 2 week sprint planning, it will always follow 2 week sprint planning. Now in this 2 week sprint planning, I'll tell you what all happens. Firstly, in sprint planning, they will note down all the features that is going to get developed, tested and released in that particular sprint. They will make it as story points in Jira board, and they will divide it according to number of developers and number of QAs that are there, and then assign the tasks. Now, how many releases can happen in one sprint? It depends on the company. There are also sprints with 1 releases. For example, if my week is a 2 week sprint, usually in 2 week sprints, how many working days would be there? So 5 days in 1 week, 5 days in the second week. So totally 10 working days. Out of that 10 working days, they would divide as, 1 release in 1 sprint. That is, after 10 working days or during the sprint completion, they can release 1 version, or they can plan 2 releases per sprint. That means after 1 week, 1 version of the app gets released. After the second week, the second version of the app gets released. Right. So these are the most common sprint planning or the sprint cycles that the companies follow these days. During sprint planning, they will prioritize the task that has to be picked up, assign the tasks based on estimation. They will calculate what are the number of developers that would be present between that sprint planning phase and number of QAs that would be present in that sprint planning phase. And based on that, they will assign the tasks, right? So they will assign the tasks, and after that, once your sprint planning meeting gets completed, you will start working on your particular assigned tasks. Developers would start developing, QAs would go through the product requirement document, and they would read each requirement carefully, start preparing the test cases. So I'll cover all that in STLC cycle. So let's come to what is STLC. It is called as software testing life cycle. It's nothing but it is it is a cycle that the testers follow. Like I mentioned, there would be sprints, right? For every release, the STLC is followed. Initially, for example, let's consider you have the release cycles from Monday to Monday. That means your requirement is given on this Monday. Next Monday, your feature or your build or your application should go live with those features, right? So what do you do? On Monday, you do requirement analysis and you would go through the requirement. If there are any doubts, you would ask the product manager about it. And next, you would go to test planning. That is, there are certain features that would require data. Not all features can just be started testing just like that, right? There would be certain data required for some features to test. So all that test planning will happen here. So you will go through a cycle on which you can write the test cases. You will think through the test cases. You will see how much of it can get covered and what is the time that is required for you to write those test cases. And then that is what sprint planning is. Excuse me. Right. Sorry, that is what test planning is. Next is test case documentation. Test case documentation is nothing but you will actually start writing the test cases. In this requirement analysis and test planning phase, if you have any doubts on the requirements provided, you will raise those doubts in the Jira or Confluence. The PM checks it, resolves all your doubts, and then you will continue with your work. So now you in the test case documentation phase, you will actually start writing the test cases. You will document all the test cases. It would either be your peer review or your manager reviewed, or you would give it to the PM to get your test cases reviewed to just check the coverage of the test cases. Next would be test environment setup. That is, where are you testing your application? You definitely cannot release it first and test it in production, right? Because it is not tested. You don't know the bugs that will be there. So usually there'll be a staging environment in which your applications would be tested. Now in this stage, you will also keep ready the data that is required, input data for your testing to happen. For example, what is input data? For example, you are testing a login page. Just imagine you're testing a login page. Now in this login page, what are the things that are required? First is there is just login. There'll be your username and password. Excuse me. So you should have those username and password ready with you, right? And then you should also have other invalid, valid, and mixed username and password. First, you would give both the valid username and password and check if the login is working fine. Next, you'll give only wrong username and correct password and check that the login should not happen. Third time, you will give correct username but wrong password and check the login is not happening. Fourth time, you will give both of those invalid inputs. And so these are inputs that you prepare for testing your application. Right. Next is test execution. This is where you start executing your test cases. In this stage, you will execute your test cases for whichever given build. And then after executing the test cases, you will file bugs. Mostly people use Jira to file bugs, most of the companies. So you will start filing bugs in your main ticket. And then you will assign it to the developer. The developer checks the bug and then the developer would fix the bug and give a new build to you. Now you will do two kinds of testings, retesting and regression testing. What is retesting? Retesting is just checking the bug fix. For example, you had filed one bug and the developer fixes it and gives it to you. Now it is not only sufficient to check if the bug is working fine or not. You have to check if fixing that bug is not affecting any other modules of your application. That is called retesting. Alright, so you will do both kinds of these tests, retesting and regression testing, and then make sure that all your bugs are resolved, all your test cases are passed. Only then you will go for test closure. Next step, that is, you will mention all the details, your ticket link, the number of bugs that you filed, number of iterations of testing that you did, and number of test cases written, and what was the time that took for your testing to get completed, and think different types of testings that you have done for this particular feature, and send a sign-off email. These are some components in sign-off email. That is a very important part for a test closure. That is, you are telling that this feature I have completed testing and I've given it to you. All right. So that is called test closure. Now, what is SDLC? Software Development Life Cycle. Software Development Life Cycle is just like SDLC. This is just the development phase. Now, STLC or Software Testing Life Cycle is a part of Software Development Life Cycle. Here, it is exactly the same thing. First, you will get requirements, and the requirements gets analyzed, and it will go to the designing phase for the feature to get built, and then it goes to the coding phase where the developer actually builds that feature, and then it comes to the testing team where the testing team tests the application, and then it comes to deployment. That is, once your testing is completed, it'll get deployed. It will get pushed to release or production environment where it is available for your users to use. And then is maintenance. That is, you just have to monitor if your feature is working fine or not. All right. So these are the different stages in software development life cycle. Now, there are, in a software, there would be two parts. There would be UI, there would be APIs. Now, what is UI? Any part of your application that you can touch and feel is called a UI. That is, you can see it. You can see the application, you can see the buttons, you can see the CTA buttons, you can see the headings, you can see the text boxes. Those are called the UI. Now, what is API? Now, in a software, there'll be two important things: your client and your server, right? Server is where your data is saved. For example, in your client, just consider that you're entering in your login page, you're entering a username and password, and then you're clicking on login. Now, how does your application know that this username and password is existing and it has to let you proceed further in the application? Because it will check from the server if this username and password is saved, right? Now, between your client and server, there has to be a medium. That is called API, or Application Programmable Interface. So that is an entity where it speaks between your client and your server. It will take your request from the client, give it to the server, fetch the data from your server, give it to the client. All right, so that is a medium between your client and the server. That is called Application Programmable Interface. Now, there are two types of main APIs that gets used. One is REST API or RESTful API. The other one is SOAP API. Majority of the companies use REST APIs only. REST APIs use HTTP protocols to send request and response. Your SOAP APIs use XML formats. All right. Major of the companies use RESTful APIs. Now, in APIs, I would be covering how do you do API testing using Postman tool, and what are the status codes and different components of it. There'll be API chaining. There is something called as CRUD operations. So I'll be covering all those in details. So again, this is the description of your RESTful APIs and the type of methods or calls that we use in the RESTful API. All right. Now, so there are foremost things, important things that you mainly use in most of the times in an API. You use get call, you use post call, you use put call, and then you use delete call. I will explain in detail as we go further what is the difference between all four of these and in what scenarios are these used, right? Again, this is about API chaining. And so once you do API testing, you would get a result, right? The result you get in form of status codes. These status codes, every status code has a particular meaning, right? There'll be 100 series status code, there'll be 200 series status code. Usually when you are testing an API, you would want to fetch some username and password from a server. So you will send a GET request and you would get response in the method of status codes. If you get 200, it means it is okay. It is a successful request. Whatever request that you have sent, you have successfully fetched the data. All right. So like that, there are 5 series of status codes. 100 to 199 means it is an informational status code. 200 to 299 means it is a success status code. 300 to 399 means it is a redirection status code. 400 to 499 means it is client error. 500 to 599 means it is server error. All right. So these are some examples of the important status codes that get usually asked in the interviews. And after that, I will explain the basics of, now like I mentioned, I'll be covering automation. Now what all things would I cover in automation? Automation specifically in mobile application automation. As you already know, we use a lot of mobile application on our day-to-day basis. The demand is huge for your mobile application. So like we used to use earlier, how many of you would use web application on a regular basis? Very few of them, right? So we use mobile application for everything. We use WhatsApp for messages, we use our social media application. And not only that, we have other important applications as well. You can, there are a lot of health applications where you can book an appointment with the doctor online, order medicines online. There is Dunzo, and then there is Zepto, where you can order groceries and order anything else that you want. So by increase in demand for this mobile application, there is an increase in demand for mobile application developers and mobile application QAs, the ones who have specifically worked or have the knowledge of how to test a mobile application. So in automation, I would be covering the basics on robot framework using APM, and then we would be using Python as the language to automate our application. All right, so these would be the basics of Python. I'll be covering the basics of Python. What is robot framework? What are the basics of it? What are locators? And how do you identify a locator? How do you start automating your mobile application? Then I would be covering some of the most important interview questions that get asked during the interviews. And also I would be giving you the material from which you can prepare. All right. Okay, thank you.